This video is the second in my little mini series that I'm doing right now that covers pretty much anything I can think of to share regarding my experience having my online shop up and running for the past 6 months or so. And in this video particularly, I'm going to go over my earnings, expenses, and profits of the entire experience of opening my store. More than anything, the purpose of me talking about this is just to kind of provide some kind of insight to others and give you guys an idea of what my personal income through my shop has been like, as well as the startup costs for launching my online store, because that's something that I've gotten asked a lot. I'm also personally very comfortable talking about how much money I'm making or how much money I made in the past, but the reason behind it is in no way, shape, or form to brag in any aspect, so I just want to put that out there in case anyone is uncomfortable with that, I guess. I know money can be seen as taboo for whatever reason, but I'm sure a lot of people are curious about what certain creators are bringing in for income of their work. So for that reason, I've been really looking forward to making this video and sharing my own personal experience. So first and foremost, as you'll probably very quickly realize, as I talk about this, I am currently nowhere close to being able to run my own business as a full-time job. I do sadly work in retail for a huge majority of my income, and I currently don't think I can see myself being able to use my own art to support myself for at least another year or so. I'm definitely building traction and getting to the point where I can be just an established self-employed artist, but not anytime in the immediate future. I do get income from YouTube monetization, Patreon, and of course my shop, but these three things combined still only amounts to generally around 20 to 30% of what I'm making at my retail job. So with that all out of the way, let's actually get into the numbers side of things, which honestly was actually pretty interesting for me to calculate on my own, since I've never gone through and actually calculated exactly how much money has gone into things like service fees, product expenses, and all that other stuff, and then compared that to the actual earnings I was making. So even doing this myself was pretty interesting to see in that sense. So first and foremost, I've had my online store up and running since March 22nd of this year. So as of right now, I've had it for just about 6.5 months. And in that time frame, I have gotten 140 orders on my store, which has amounted to earning $3,566.24 in earnings as of the day I'm doing this voiceover, which is October 6th. I'll put up a little pie chart on the screen while we get into talking about what my actual profit is compared to my expenses. And as you can see, of this $3,500, today I found out that my actual profit that I've made directly from my online store in 6 months after all of my expenses are calculated is $225.45. When I was going through and calculating fees, shipping costs, expenses, all that, I was actually getting kind of worried that this number of profit was going to be in the negative. So just the fact that it's positive was really exciting because honestly, a lot of businesses can genuinely take a good amount of time before they're generating any kind of profit. Looking at it objectively, having a profit margin of less than 10% is obviously god-awful, but let's talk about why this is so low. So the two things that are entirely out of my control when it comes to expenses are platform fees from Stripe and PayPal, and then shipping costs. Stripe and PayPal fees are something that is completely impossible to avoid, and sadly in of itself takes about 10% of the actual earnings I receive. Shipping is obviously another thing that can't be helped if you're selling physical products. I personally use Pirate Ship to purchase my shipping labels. It's a 100% free platform and it works alongside Big Cartel, which is the website platform I use for my store, so I can very easily purchase bulk labels. And Pirate Ship also sells discounted USPS labels, so they're cheaper than what you'd pay if you were buying a shipping label directly from the post office, which is really nice because anywhere you can save money is very beneficial. And then from that pie chart I showed earlier, the two largest sections were expenses I made last year and expenses from this year. Between 2020 and 2021, I have spent $2,308.86 towards things needed for my shop. These things include pretty much everything I've purchased directly from my store, so printer inks, sticker paper, outsourced prints, shipping supplies, etc. And the largest contributions to both of these categories were the bigger items, which were things like my Cricut Explore Air, my Epson scanner, my guillotine paper cutter, all that kind of stuff, which are much pricier items, but they're also one-time expenses. And by no means is this the exact dollar amount that every person is going to need to open an online store. Everyone's situation is going to be different, and this will wildly affect the startup cost for opening a store. Like, for example, if you're going to sell stickers, do you want to spend the money to outsource them or print them from home? And then if you're printing them from home, do you want to buy a cutting machine for a couple $100s, or do you want to hand cut your stickers? If you're selling prints, you might have to try several different kinds of cardstock before you settle on a paper you like, and that can also be pretty expensive. So lots of factors actually go into what a startup cost will look like for you personally. Something a lot of people might not also immediately take into consideration is how much shipping supplies cost, because there's something that you kind of think of on the back burner, but then you go into buying them and it's kind of upsetting how much you have to spend on shipping supplies sometimes. If you're shipping wildly different sizes of products, you're probably going to have to want different sizes of mailers. For me, the initial cost of shipping supplies alone was, I think, around $100. I had to buy bulk rigid mailers, glassine bags, tissue paper, a postage scale, and just like a bunch of small stuff that really adds up. And I had to buy that all before I launched my online store. So after spending several $1,000s between fees, shipping, and supplies, I'm left with a couple $100s, but I'm still left with a ton of inventory and supplies. Just going through my active inventory of what is currently listed on my website, which is stuff that is completely ready to be shipped out, it's all produced, it's all I have it. Just going through that, of what is listed on my website, if I were to sell out of everything, I would get over $5,000 in earnings. Shipping and service fees from PayPal or Stripe would still be deducted from this, but even if they took 50%, that would still be over $2,500 of profit. I also still have a bunch of unused sticker paper, cardstock for prints, printer ink, etc. that will eventually be turned into other products. So while my profit margin currently is very bad, I still have so much product that I can sell. I can say with confidence as well that my biggest load of expenses has been taken care of, so I know going forward that my profit margins for my shop will grow a good amount because I've made all of the big expenses that I need to in the beginning. I bought my Cricut, that alone was like $230 I think, and then Cricut mats, accessories, stuff like that probably bumped it up to around $300. My Epson scanner was around $100. My guillotine paper cutter was around $40 to $50-ish. I've tried out a couple of different kinds of sticker papers and finally settled with one that I really like. Just a bunch of both one-time expenses and trial and error expenses that I'm not going to have to make in the future, and that'll really help change the ratio of my expenses and my profit. And then with that out of the way, let's get into the gray area, which for me is Patreon. I know that technically the premise of this video is to talk about my earnings and expenses directly associated with my online store, but I wanted to also talk about Patreon for a little bit because without it, I definitely would not have been able to launch my online store. I've been offering physical rewards on my Patreon since November of last year, and in that time frame, I have currently made $1,942.99 through Patreon. Especially for the months between November of last year and March of this year, Patreon has been an absolute godsend when it comes to setting up my online store. With every month, I was slowly accumulating things that I needed, like my Cricut, my scanner, shipping supplies, sticker paper, whatever else, which really jump-started my ability to launch my online store, as well as just have as many different products as I did. It's also kind of impossible to differentiate the expenses I've spent on my shop versus Patreon, since I'm essentially using the same supplies, so everything I previously calculated as expenses also went towards Patreon, because I'm not going to go through and say, oh, I used 20% of my paper towards Patreon, so I'll take 20% of the cost of paper out of my store expenses. All of my expenses for Patreon were technically counted on my store expenses little pie chart there, because there's no way to reasonably differentiate that, so I did not bother. But if we instead add the $1,900 I've made on Patreon to the profit section of the pie chart I showed earlier, this really changes how things look. And this is the way I'm also choosing to look at my profit margin for the sake of my own sanity. This very easily turned the profit portion of the pie into the largest section by a good amount. And while technically this look on my profits is now not solely from my online store, this is a much more realistic look at how much money I've made through my business. And like I said earlier, everyone's situation is going to be wildly different depending on their starting point, and also depending on what exactly they're trying to do with their online store. I just kind of gradually threw money towards things I needed as I had the extra money, which led to a 6-month or so span of time in which I got everything together and I actually opened my storefront. And really, even in 6 months, especially the first 6 months of opening my online store, it's really not the best statistic-wise to see how my store is going to continue to do. It's actually been very inconsistent, especially as like a month-to-month basis of sales. Like in March, for example, that was the first month I launched my store. I made over $1,000 in revenue. And then the following month, April, I made $75.70 in revenue through my online store. So there's some months where I make over $1,000 or really close to $1,000, and then other months where, specifically April, that was the worst month. That was the only month I have made under $100. But it's extremely inconsistent, especially so far, and especially since I'm specifically using Big Cartel for my online store, which is a platform that doesn't have any kind of searchable storefront like Etsy, for example, does. I do think if I had actually made my platform for my store on Etsy, I would have definitely gotten more sales by now. However, in my last video, I did mention that I went through and I calculated all of Etsy's fees, and just in this profit margin alone, had I opened my store on Etsy and sold everything that I had sold, I would have paid an additional, I think it was over $200 or just shy of $200 in Etsy fees. So while I probably would have made a little bit more money and made more sales, the fact that I would have spent that extra, my $200 profit margin, that would have been gone because it would have gone towards Etsy fees. So it really just depends on your circumstance. If you have small social media accounts and you want to open an online store, I'd really highly recommend Etsy because you can work on such a small scale that it makes it, first of all, very easy for startup costs, but also it kind of dips your toes into things and it's a very good starting point. And honestly, between this video about online stores and my last one, which I talked about choosing a website platform and my experience building my website, I think I've pretty much covered the biggest topics I could think of on this. If you have any more questions at all that I haven't answered in these 2 videos about starting an online store, I'll probably just do kind of a Q&A situation for my next video in case you guys do have any in-depth or helpful questions regarding online stores, because like I've mentioned, starting an online store is so stressful. There's just so much to it. There's so much work you have to put into it. And thankfully, we are in a day and age where there are so many resources online and people sharing their experiences and all that kind of stuff. That's so insanely beneficial, but it's also really nice to ask specific people hey, how has this gone for you? So if you have any questions at all regarding opening an online store, I'll probably make a community tab post, or you can leave your question below and I will get around to answering it, because I've been wanting to do this series and just talk about my own experience with my online store, so I'm very happy to be finally getting around to it, and I hope between this video and the last one, it was very helpful to you guys who are looking to do this for yourself, or if you're just kind of thinking about opening an online store and selling your own artwork. So if you missed my most recent video, I'll leave a link in the description box below. It'll probably just be to a playlist of these videos because that's honestly the easiest way of doing it and keeping them together. But if you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. And I will see you guys in the next video.